This is the story of one man, Dimitrie Dimancescu, who grew up in a small Romanian town. Moving to Bucharest with his family, he excelled in academics. In 1913, as a high school student, he founded the Romanian Boy Scout movement. 2 years later, at age 19, Dimitrie volunteered in the army to be joined later by his brother Ioan. Serving as an officer in Prince Carol's newly constituted Hunters Regiment, Dimitrie kept a journal of his experiences. And late in life, exiled to the United States, he typed his memoirs. This is his account of World War I and the grueling and deadly 2,000 kilometers or 1,200 miles he would cover, starting as a lieutenant and ending as a wounded and bemetaled captain.
My grandfather, Dimitrie Dimancescu, brought his troop of Boy Scouts here to the Bucegi Mountains in 1913. As a rite of passage, they would tie a rope to one another and climb along narrow cliff edges, looking over a 6,000-foot drop. In 1915, Dimitrie and his scouts volunteered to fight for the defense of Romania. It wasn't long before these same valleys were marched through by legions of German troops. The courage that will be required of these young soldiers is immeasurable. I've traveled here to retrace the path of my grandfather and uncover the story of Romania in the First World War.
August 1914. Europe fell into war. They called it the Great War, and few thought it would last more than 6 months. But soon, empires were battling one another. On the Western Front, Germany and Austria faced Britain, France and Italy, and Russia along the Eastern Front. The Ottoman Turks and Bulgaria confronted French and English armies along northern boundaries of Greece. In 1915-1916, the war stalled without major advances. Millions had already died. To the east, one country, Romania, only 5 decades old as an independent nation, had remained neutral under the reign of King Carol I, but he died in 1914 to be succeeded by his German-born nephew, Ferdinand. The latter's politically astute wife, Queen Marie, granddaughter of Britain's Queen Victoria and niece of Tsar Nicholas, influenced him to favor the Allies. On August 27th, Romania declared war against the Central Powers of Germany, Austria, and Hungary. Fighting with antiquated forces and a reluctant military ally in Tsarist Russia, Romania launched an ambitious attack against the Central Powers on the Eastern Front.
I was 19 years old when in 1915, Prince Carol, who knew me well from Boy Scout days, came to me with an offer. If you enlist as a volunteer, you can join my Hunters Regiment, of which I am its commander. A day later, dressed in the Hunters uniform of the Queen Elizabeth No. 2 Regiment, I joined Company 1, commanded by Carol. Almost a year later, After being moved to the infantry military school, I was having lunch at home when a soldier from my company called me urgently to return to my regiment and to take my military trunk with me. As I left, my mother stopped me and removed one of her earrings. Putting it into my hand, she said quietly, "Make sure to bring this back to me." Quickly, I dressed into my uniform and prepared my small trunk. My small trunk was then put on a military wagon train which consisted of 5 carts, each pulled by 2 strong horses. I was now in a regiment of cyclists destined to be attached to the 1st Division of Cavalry. We were organized by companies and platoons. The command of this company was taken over by Captain Nicu Tataranu. There were 3 other officers in the company: Captain Badulescu, Lieutenant Mavriki, and Sub-Lieutenant in Reserve Aslan, and myself. On August 28th, our regiment left Bucharest in a southerly direction towards the Danube River. We didn't know exactly where we were going. The general direction was south, towards the headquarters of the division. But with bicycles following muddy roads full of holes and bumps, we could hardly travel 30 to 40 kilometers a day. We experienced many punctures and blown tires, and struggled to keep up with the division's cavalry. Its troops on horseback could travel 50 kilometers a day, so we had to travel at night just to keep up. The moment we reached the division at daybreak, the cavalry would leave for the next stop. We finally came to Zimnicia, a small town on the Danube River facing Bulgaria, and were sent to the north of the town where there was a small hill. We were ordered to dig a trench across the main road. Our mission was to stop any enemy advance. As encouragement, 2 75mm guns were installed 300 meters behind us. But unknown to us, 2 Austrian boats lay hidden behind an island on the Danube. Shells started exploding around us with great precision, and one of the shells landed between the guns, beheading the young commanding officer named Costafaru. He was one of the Costafaru boys, all friends of mine from Boy Scout days. We buried him beside his gun, which was also destroyed. We were then told to quickly retire and were sent to Flamanda, 100 kilometers east on the Danube. For me and my company of soldiers, this was the way the war started.
Well, the military events surrounding Romania's initial weeks in the war were based on the fact that by necessity, they felt they had to invade Transylvania first. They had to take the initiative because that was the basic reason why they entered the war. However, they then had to shift their attention to the south because the Bulgarians, with the aid of some German forces led by Field Marshal Augustin Mackensen, attacked the Romanian frontier in the Dobruja.
My journey back began in Bucharest, Romania's capital city. Planning the journey with my father, we left town passing the old royal palace, toward the tree-lined boulevards along which the army marched to war in 1916. Our adventure would take us back to Dimitrie's war experiences, as well as help me better understand my heritage. Traveling south, we encountered numerous relics of the First World War, memorials, statues, and graves. Beside a cemetery, we visited an Orthodox village church. Invited in by the local priest, he showed us relics of the war and lists of villagers who had died in battle. He explained that peasants were, and still are, closely tied to the soil, both physically and spiritually. He'll fight fiercely for his small patch of earth. Almost a century later, World War I remains a living memory in this small church. Death, I soon discovered, is deeply ritualized in ancient folkways that endure from pre-Christian times to the present. We soon neared the Danube River, and with help from villagers found our way through wide expanses of wheat fields toward Flamanda. Here, Dimitrie would face another deadly encounter. Today simply a dot on a map, this was once a small hamlet along the borders of the river. A coincidence in Flamanda was unexpected and striking. Dimitrie's memoirs described an ancient hollowed tree that stood near the riverbank. This tree marked a fateful crossroads between life and death for he and his soldiers. Almost at that very spot on the map, we found a lone half-burnt tree, itself hollow. From there, a villager opened a gate to a path, leading our way to the banks of the Danube River.
At this time, General Alexandru Averescu proposed that in order to redress the defeat in the south, that he be given command of something like 50% of the Romanian army and to cross the Danube and to launch a surprise offensive, possibly even surrounding the Bulgarian and German forces and sort of reverse that situation. The problem was that there was no bridge. The bridge was built with boats to make the crossing, but it was, in a sense, was a bridgehead without a bridge.
After a forced march to Flamanda, we pushed our bicycles towards a small inlet where our divisions were now crowded together, waiting to cross the Danube River. Rumors of victory made us anxious to cross. As we waited, my company took shelter under an old tree with a large hollow in the trunk. Overhead were German planes that I knew well would try and bomb us. I got into the tree trunk and told my soldiers to lie down on the ground. Then suddenly I saw a German plane circling in our direction. I felt ashamed to be hidden in the hollow and came out to lie on the ground with the soldiers. I lay face up in order to follow the plane's movements. My former instructor, Sergeant Kiritsa, pushed his way past his soldiers and into the hollow of the tree. Hearing a whistling noise, I shouted, "Lie down!" The bomb fell in our midst, killing about 10 men. All around, one could hear moans and yells. One shell hit Sergeant Kiritsa right in the forehead, killing him. We buried him under the tree. It was only with a sudden outburst of rain that we found our salvation. But soon, from behind the clouds came 3 aircraft that bombed parts of the bridge into small pieces. Soldiers along the riverbank were killed.
Faced with all these setbacks, General Averescu decided to cancel all operations at Flamanda. Each division received an order with directives to withdraw rapidly from Bulgaria and the Flamanda zone. The army left, heading north in the direction of the Olt Valley to face strengthened Austro-Hungarian armies now counterattacking Romania from the north. The 1st Cavalry Division was to execute an urgent overnight push up the Olt River behind the German advance guard somewhere on the road between Târgu Jiu and Craiova.
Using a detailed wartime sketch from my grandfather's diary, we came to Izvorul, where his first direct confrontation with advancing troops occurred. Water wells with huge wooden levers sketched on his map were still there. Villagers used them as reference points in guiding us to the exact points labeled in his war diary. Tracking westward, in directions my grandfather followed, we experienced the vast plains of Wallachia. Scorching hot in summer, frigid and windblown in winter, they stretch flat toward the endless horizons. Day in, day out, shepherds stand lonely vigils with their cows or sheep. Occasional horse carts and lone villagers passed by. The distance they walked struck again and again. Getting a lift helped occasionally.
German Ninth Army forces were now invading along the Carpathian mountain crest line of Transylvania. These same mountains long witnessed conquering armies. In 101 AD, Emperor Trajan of Rome sent his legions across the same deep wooded valleys and rugged ridgelines to conquer the Dacian peoples. Now, 1800 years later, Erich von Falkenhayn, a veteran German commander, led 325,000 newly arrived soldiers in a northern counteroffensive against Romania. To the west, at the Vulcan Pass, where Dacians fought Roman soldiers, war-toughened German and Austrian cavalry and infantry made headway into higher plateaus. Amidst the German invaders was a young lieutenant, himself destined for fame decades later. Leading companies of soldiers from the elite Württemberg regiment, Lieutenant Erwin Rommel broke through Romanian lines into the southern lowlands. His tactical breakthrough opened the floodgates for Falkenhayn's army. Momentum, modern weapons, and heavy guns on their side, they marched rapidly forward across the flat Wallachian plains. After a few short weeks, they occupied the regional capital of Craiova. A rare photograph captures Major Theodor Sprosser leading his troops through the city. Next to him rides Lieutenant Rommel. This onslaught led the Romanian High Command to order an urgent repositioning of its forces. German-led divisions swept rapidly eastward. Defenses were crumbling as Romanian generals attempted in vain to slow the rapid advance now coming from 3 directions along a front extending more than 1,000 kilometers or 600 miles. Bucharest, the capital, was now endangered.
Din punctul meu de vedere, instrucția era relativ precară și, lucru foarte important, nu toți soldații au avut parte de propria armă la intrarea în război, ceea ce a făcut ca mulți dintre ei să fie practic nepregătiți. Nu vorbim doar de faptul că armele pe care le utilizează, armele individuale, nu sunt la nivelul unui război de epocă industrială, ci vorbim și de precaritatea instrucțiilor cu acest tip de arme. Era vorba și de puși diferite, ceea ce făcea ca aprovizionarea pe linia frontului să fie extrem de dificilă pentru mai multe tipuri de arme. Și asta a contat de asemenea foarte mult. Apoi era vorba de aprovizionare în general, de felul în care distanța între linia frontului și capacitatea structurilor de logistică de a aproviziona linia frontului era de foarte multe ori inexistentă.
All day under heavy rain, carrying our bicycles on our backs, we struggled along muddy paths. For 2 days, we slept in ditches along the roadside and rested in any shelter we could find. As we marched, we expected the German advance guard at any moment. Then, just as we approached a village, a rifle shot cracked out from a peasant house. An old man was quickly found guilty of the shooting, and my platoon was ordered to execute him the next day. At dawn, the old man was tied to a pole, and I suddenly had the shock of seeing my father's image in his face. I went to the commanding officer and told him I could not execute his order. I was convinced he was not guilty. The officer warned me that I could be shot for refusing his order. Although the enemy might appear any minute, I went to the old man's home. There, another family member admitted he had fired the rifle, fearing we would steal his animals. He was shot. Such incidents affected me very much. A new order reached us at Izvorul de Sus on the Teleorman River, where our divisional headquarters were now located. Here, my company took part in its first violent action. The commander of the division gave me the order to take a platoon over the small Teleorman Bridge, over which the Germans were expected to come at any moment. But German armored vehicles had already crossed it, so I quickly decided to make a barricade in the hamlet. This might delay the German advance towards the divisional headquarters a short distance away. From a ditch, we waited in a defensive position, checking our weapons, nervously preparing to ambush the approaching Germans from the side of the road. And from nowhere came German armored cars rumbling into view. I ordered the men to hold their fire until they were within 150 meters and to aim at the tires. The Germans machine-gunned us from their armored cars, but they could not tell where we were. Our captain Taturano, however, was wounded and evacuated. With the German convoy now temporarily stopped, I took advantage of this delay and retreated with my soldiers. We came to open fields and took a northeast direction. We soon lost contact with the company and the division. We walked in hiding across the flat farmland. In a village, I found the headquarters of the 2nd Division. If the Germans had advanced a little faster, they would have caught them. All around were scattered soldiers or groups of soldiers lost from their units. All were anxious not to be captured, and all were looking for their units. My group's most immediate problem was food. The peasants we met in the small hamlets would not even speak to us. All their chickens and small stock had been stolen from their yards. So we were fighting hunger as well as exhaustion. A defensive front was being formed west of the capital along the Argeș River. Recently arrived Russian army divisions were to be positioned on the southern flank. I figured that if our division would fight for the defense of our capital, it would do so to the northwest flank. So all during my march through the fields, I tried to find them. I told myself that if the German advance guard caught me from behind, I would not have a chance. Therefore, I traced a straight line across the wide open, flat plains towards the oil fields of Ploiești and Câmpina.
In less than 3 months, more than 1.5 million armed men had come to face one another, Romanians and Tsarist Russians against German, Hungarian, Bulgarian, and Turkish forces. The invasion of German-led forces fast took a heavy toll. Enemy armies now occupied most of western Wallachia, invading from the north and south. But Romania's plight had not gone unnoticed by her allies. The British knew that if the Central Powers defeated the Romanians, they would relocate their forces to the Western Front. This could turn the tide of the war in their favor. They also knew that if Romania's abundant oil wells and depots were captured, they would be used to fuel the Central Powers' war machine. To counter the threat, British intelligence ordered Major Norton Griffiths and a team of British engineers on a mission to destroy as many oil wells as possible before they fell into German hands. Griffiths gained fame for his exploits as a tunnel master who oversaw the sabotage of German defense lines on the Western Front. In July 1916, he supervised what was headlined as the greatest man-made earthquake under German lines at Messines, France. Now, 4 months later, he traveled with a small team through Scandinavia, across Russia, and southward into Romania.
As we got near Ploiești and Câmpina, I could see a long black cloud rising from the oil fields on a shallow hill, where oil depots had been set on fire so that they would not be captured by the enemy. At night it was a frightening spectacle, with huge flames rising skyward. We were between this wall of fire and the German wave of troops pushing up from behind, when suddenly we encountered a car with an English officer, whose name I recall well as Norton Griffiths. Behind him were several trucks with Romanian soldiers. In perfect French, he informed me that he was the leader of a group setting fire to the oil depots and other installations. When we spoke, I mentioned that I had been told that the best method to destroy an oil well was to take large industrial screwdrivers and wedge them upside down deep into the well's pipe. Dropped in the right place, the screwdriver completely dejoints the gears and makes them unworkable. Taking me and my group with him to demonstrate to his team how to execute this method, we worked fast, moving from well to well.
On the morning of November the 26th, I drove out to Târgoviște from Bucharest. All reservoir valves were opened and the oil allowed to flow into the dams surrounding the reservoirs, and then ignited, thus burning and exploding. The roads were becoming impassable with refugees and the retreat of Romanian convoys. All along, the enemy were making rapid progress from the north and from the south to our rear. At the Vega refinery, one 50,000-ton reservoir was virtually lifted in the air, and simultaneously, the half-ton plates were scattered far beyond and around the officers working. The spectacular sight was remarkable. The heavy volume of smoke, which stretched for some 100 kilometers or more, must have considerably inconvenienced the enemy on the windward side.
Though retreating, my grandfather was soon engaged in the horrific task of laying waste to the country's oil wells and reserves. This was in the then oil-abundant region of Ploiești that brought enormous riches to Romania before and after World War I. The wells still stand and produce, feeding giant refineries, though in lesser quantities. But even here, the peasant past catches up with you. We encountered a shepherd whose goats crossed the polluted petroleum fields around us. It was this very oil that invading German armies were after in World War I, and again, 3 decades later in World War II. Fortified gun emplacements from that era still stand.
In a 1-week period, Major Griffiths and his Romanian team managed to destroy 400 wells and 210 million gallons of oil, an amount equal to 70,000 large modern-day tanker trucks. As a result of his work, the Germans were long delayed in getting oil to flow again. The effects were soon felt on the Western Front by slowing the increasingly oil-dependent German war machine and buying time for the Allies. British High Command wired its compliments to Colonel Norton Griffiths. The first week of December, Ploiești was occupied by Falkenhayn's troops. Bucharest was also occupied. German forces marched through the streets and the military commanders established themselves in the city. Just 2 weeks earlier, in a rush of chaotic events, King Ferdinand, Queen Marie, and the government had escaped northward to the regional capital of Iași in Moldavia. During her tense train journey, Queen Marie would write in her diary, "Nothing is settled. Never in my life have I gone out thus into the unknown." 5 months of war had taken its toll, Of 450,000 Romanian soldiers at the start of the war, only 50,000 remained in fighting order.
L'hiver de 1917 était un hiver particulièrement froid, un des plus froids d'Europe au XXe siècle. Alors les gens ont essayé de se débrouiller comme ils pouvaient et les uniformes étaient de moins en moins réglementaires. On a utilisé des peaux de moutons, des peaux d'ours pour avoir chaud. On mettait des bonnets sur la tête comme des chapkas ou des choses comme ça. Tout était autorisé, le but était de ne pas mourir de froid.
We walked and walked through the cold northward. Soldiers and civilians retreated from the enemy all around us. We ate and slept wherever we could. At the same time, we could now see Russian cavalry patrols and troops moving southward. We were all going towards Moldavia, hoping that we might be able to stop the Germans somewhere north of Focșani.
Much like the British, France was itself hemorrhaging men and materials along its trench lines. To diminish German strength, French authorities were anxious to see Romania hold the front to the east. To encourage this, in October of 1916, it dispatched Henri Mathias Berthelot, one of its respected generals, famed for his successes at Verdun, to assist the Romanian king and his army in reorganizing and rearming. Like Colonel Griffiths, he traveled across Russia to enter Romania. With him came 1,400 officers and soldiers who had volunteered to serve in this mission. His arrival in Bucharest sparked hopes of stalling the tidal wave of German-led divisions threatening to break into Moldavia.
In a small railway station, I met an officer who told me that he had seen our division heading north. A train took us in that direction. It was slow and stopped at every small station. Eventually, we arrived at Botoșani, where we were obliged to get off. The good news was that our division and the cyclists were in a village only 30 kilometers away. After an anxious life during the withdrawal, it seemed now as if we were living in a vacation resort. We were sleeping well and eating well. Here, our detachment of cyclists was given training in modern weaponry by French advisors.
Alors une journée type, c'est une journée, d'abord on fait des exercices physiques, mais le soldat roumain est robuste. Donc ça, c'est juste pour entretenir. En revanche, il faut lui apprendre des choses qu'il ignore, par exemple le maniement des nouvelles armes. La grenade, la mitrailleuse, qui lui a fait défaut pendant la première partie de la campagne. On parle avec le soldat pour lui expliquer pourquoi il faut se battre. Pas seulement pour le roi, pour les boyards, mais pour lui-même, pour ses enfants, pour avoir enfin sa terre.
The best part of the day was when we were taught the handling of machine guns and the dangerous French hand grenades. The use of the hand grenades was taught to the officers by a French officer. When we were sent back to the battlefields, I carried 2 sacks of grenades, and they became my favorite weapon.
Into early August, as 1 million men confronted one another, violent German incursions and counterattacks at the small town of Marișești were resisted. Trench warfare and severe hand-to-hand combat took place. Heavy artillery decimated the front lines. To the consternation of its commanders and leadership in Berlin and Vienna, the German advance stalled. This became a defining military victory for the Romanian army. The Mareșești front would remain impenetrable over ensuing weeks. Dismayed by their stalled offensive at Mareșești, German generals shifted their attacks northward. To the mountainous Transylvania and Moldavian border between the Oitus and Trotuș rivers flowed troops to reinforce divisions already entrenched there over winter and spring months. Lieutenant Rommel's elite Württemberg regiment, which had returned to Germany in January, was rushed back in a rapid 6-day, 1,600-kilometer or 1,000-mile train ride and forced march to the forested ridgelines facing Moldavia. A German officer would refer to Hill 789 as the last stronghold between German armies and a breakthrough into Moldavia.
News reached us daily that German armies were massing along the mountain crest lines. Many new troops were sent rapidly into positions along the Carpathian foothills. New artillery cannons were being positioned high up into the hills. Trenches were reinforced. We were now in reserve, waiting for the moment to be called forward. Senior officers told us that a new attack was now expected on the high ground.
We flew by helicopter from Transylvania to the Oitus battle site. From the air, I immediately understood the clear divide between the forested Transylvania west and the barren Moldavian hills to the east. This made more evident the tactical importance of Hill 789 in achieving a final breakthrough into Moldavia for Germany. Using old military maps to guide us, we found a dirt path known by the locals as the German Road. Our way up took us directly through the landmarks identified by Rommel in his entries and sketches. While walking through dense undergrowth, I noticed an interesting carving on a tree, and suddenly a flock of goats appeared from the brush. Around the bend I could hear the sound of a flute, and found a man who resembled the mythical Pan. Finally we approached a clearing with a grassy knoll ahead. We had reached the crest of Hill 789. I tried to imagine the storm of explosive events and emotional struggle that echoed through the surrounding landscape. From above, the trench system was unmistakable. The lines zigzag into view. Scattered along them were bullet shells, shrapnel, and battle artifacts. War illustrator George Pratt and I collected bullet shells still littering the ground. Below the hill, my father and I stood, exactly where Dimitrie and his soldiers met German forces in deadly confrontation in August of 1917. Today, atop the ridge, stands a cross in memory of the thousands who died.
In the campaigns in Romania in 1916 and 1917, what the Romanian soldiers coming up against is two problems. First, a veteran army in the form of the German army, both men and officers, but secondly, an elite unit in the form of the Württemberg Mountain Battalion. This is what Rommel's men would have been carrying in 1917. The light machine gun, the principal infantry carbine, and Les, tell us something about this.
This is the standard German World War I grenade. It's a concussion grenade. That is, it does not have fragments. It kills by concussion. And you set it off basically by taking the cap off. You pull this little porcelain ball, which sets off the fuse, and from there you have 5.5 seconds until it explodes.
What we have here is a very, very young officer, early 20s, who was commanding at some points no fewer than 6 rifle companies, a machine gun company or 2, a signal company. He can be in the field with 11 or 12 or 1,300 men under his direct control, and that would certainly be unusual for a lieutenant in any army.
After German attacks at Groziești and Târgu Ocna failed to breach through the narrow river valleys, the German 117th Infantry Division was ordered to maneuver across the Hill 789 Koșna crest. Spearheading the attack was the Württemberg Regiment's Major Theodor Sprosser. He delegated the task to Lieutenant Rommel, who set out with 6 companies and heavy machine guns, much as in the Vulcan Pass in November, 9 months earlier. His battle diary would note ominously, "Nothing short of a complete eradication of the entire enemy line would release our forces for the final decision on the Western Front."
Mein Angriffsplan ist, den ahnungslosen Gegner schlagartig mit MG-Feuer zu überfallen, mit Teilen die feindlichen Stellungen dicht rechts und links des Eichenwäldchens aufzurollen und abzuriegeln. 5-mal haben wir so den Gegner, der immer stärker wird, aus seinen Stellungen gejagt. Da erhalte ich plötzlich einen Schuss, von rückwärts in den linken Unterarm das Blut spritzt. Mich umsehend entdecke ich eine Abteilung Rumänen, die auf mich feuern. Die rumänische Abteilung, befehligende französische Offizier schreit: Schlag die deutschen Hunde tot! Bis ihn aus nächster Nähe eine Kugel trifft. Immer mehr feindliche MG hämmern in unsere Reihen. Die eigenen Verluste häufen sich in erschreckendem Maße. Die Lage sieht verzweifelt aus. Nach kurzem Dauerfeuer brechen die Gebirgsschützen in die Gipfelstellung ein und fegen den Westhang des Kosna in wenigen Minuten vom Feind sauber. Unter keinen Umständen will ich das mit so viel Gewandtheit, Schneid und Blut eroberte Gelände kampflos auf Alarmnachrichten hin preisgeben. Der Mangel an Munition und Handgranaten macht es an der Stabsgruppe außerordentlich schwer, den Ansturm der rumänischen Massen zum Stehen zu bringen. Die MG-Schützen müssen ihre Gewehrstellung mit Pistole und Handgranate verteidigen. Vor der Stabsgruppe türmen sich gegen Mittag Berge von toten und verwundeten Rumänen.
August 19th started as a warm, blue-skied day. The moment of truth was at hand. The morning was calm as Rommel positioned his men to attempt again to open a breach. By the afternoon, his soldiers were hiding in wait in bushes lining the lower hills. After violent combat, the defensive trench lines were occupied. Numerous Romanian soldiers were killed and captured.
The order came to move urgently to the front line. This time we had one more officer, my brother Ioan, and I received the order to counterattack. With extraordinary spirit, we climbed to the top of the hill, chasing away the Germans with grenades and our rifles. This was only temporary, as the Germans prepared to counterattack by launching an artillery barrage. In our turn, we were obliged to retreat with the Germans in pursuit. The up and down attacks happened again and again. We lost sense of time, but somehow found the energy to fight. Our soldiers conquered the hills below the crest of Hill 789. As we waited for another attack, a messenger brought an envelope addressed to First Lieutenant Dimancescu. I took the envelope and opened it and saw that it was an order for my brother to take a patrol to the top of Koshna Hill and found out exactly where the Germans were located. This order seemed a death sentence. I did not give my brother the order, but instead I left with a soldier. We crawled up to a corner of the meadow where there was a clump of thistle bushes. We lay facing the enemy without moving or talking. At dawn, 30 meters in front of me, I saw a German soldier lying on the ground, face forward. Simultaneously, both of us took our rifles, eyed each other, and fired. I saw him drop his head and realized he was dead. A bullet from his rifle had pierced my foot and hit my soldier's head, killing him on the spot. The pain and loss of blood made me incapable of moving any further. A day later, 2 infantrymen found me lying down and they dragged me away. I was taken to the hospital. In my whole life, I have never heard so many sorrowful cries, and never will I forget those. I remember that the instant I was hit, I thought of the earring Mother had given me, and of my promise to bring it back. One day there was a great commotion in the hospital. Queen Marie had come to visit. She went from bed to bed, talking separately to every wounded man in my ward. She recognized me immediately as the former Boy Scout and promised to give my mother news about me. News from the Koshna front came from Captain Badulescu. Dear Dimancescu, we stayed a few more days at Poiana lui Boboc. Because of the many losses that we suffered, we withdrew for 2 days in order to reorganize my unit. After 4 bloody attacks, I was left with only 4 fighters from the company. The total losses up to now are 121 dead and wounded, and 14 lightly wounded and not evacuated, a grand total of 135. As your brother, Captain Badulescu. After 2 months, I recovered and was sent back to my company to serve in northern Moldavia and Bessarabia. On December 1, King Ferdinand and Queen Marie entered the capital, escorted by the famed French general Berthelot and commanding generals of the different Romanian armies. Behind them were various detachments from various divisions and regiments which had entered Bucharest. People were overjoyed. I was now 22 years old.
Așa că uniunea tuturor acestor provincii ca rezultat al războiului a fost un miracol. România s-a dublat ca teritoriu și ca populație și a ieșit cu totul altceva. Și ceea ce este totuși admirabil și găsesc în favoarea românilor, dacă ne comparăm cu ce s-a întâmplat în Iugoslavia și în Cehoslovacia, este că aceste provincii care nu fuseseră niciodată împreună au putut să creeze un stat care a funcționat în mod normal. Putem spune că e alt personaj. Românul este alt după 1920 decât era în veacul precedent. Asta e o certitudine.
This hill stands as a metaphor for Dimitrie's war. Like the mythical David, Romania stood with its back to a cliff, facing an opponent of Goliath's size and strength. Overcoming these tremendous odds changed this country forever. The scars are still visible, and the story is not forgotten. For my father and I, this incredible adventure brought us closer to the land and gave meaning to the phrase, pro patria.